"Hey, where'd you get this wrench?" He held it up, scorched and dirty, but one code still visible. Echo 9, 7841B. She looked like any other mechanic. But what secret code etched on her tool revealed her true identity? This is a story you won't believe. A simple wrench, a hidden code, and a past that will shock you to the core. Discover the truth behind the seemingly ordinary mechanic in this mind-blowing revelation. Ever feel underestimated? This mechanic faced it every day until a hidden code revealed her incredible secret. Find out how she turned the tables and proved everyone wrong. You're watching Veteran Biker, and we know you're here. Drop a 1 if you're new, or 2 if you've been with us. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that were never meant to surface. Red Line Repair Depot. A place where the air itself seemed to vibrate with the relentless energy of industry. Here the symphony was of grinding gears, the metallic echo of hammers, and the steady, powerful hum of colossal machines at work. It was a world of raw mechanics, of precision engineering, and of the unspoken hierarchy that governed its inhabitants. In this intricate dance of metal and motion, Nora Elwyn was, to most, an unremarkable figure. She moved through the vast, dimly lit bays of the depot like a ghost, her presence so understated it bordered on invisible. They called her a mechanic, a simple cog in the relentless turning mechanism of the facility. Yet, to those who truly paid attention, which were few, there was an almost unsettling efficiency to her every movement, a quiet mastery that spoke of depths unseen. She was 36. Though the subtle lines around her sharp, dark eyes and the determined set of her jaw hinted at a life lived with an intensity that belied her quiet demeanor. Her dark brown hair was invariably pulled back, secured in a low, severe knot, a practical decision that prioritized function over form. Her eyes, those dark, perceptive windows, absorbed every detail, missed nothing, yet paradoxically revealed very little of the woman behind them. They were deep pools reflecting the industrial landscape around her, but guarding the secrets within with an almost impenetrable stillness. Her uniform, a grey work coverall, was a chronicle of her days, bearing the indelible stains of oil, grease and metallic dust. A second skin, worn smooth in places, roughened in others, a silent testament to countless hours spent immersed in the heart of the depot's machinery. Her hands, encased in worn utility gloves, were not merely tools, but extensions of her intellect and will. They were capable of delicate, intricate adjustments that required surgical precision, and yet possessed the raw strength to wrench recalcitrant parts into submission. Quiet she was to an almost unnatural degree. Conversation for Nora was an unnecessary expenditure of energy, a distraction from the complex, evolving puzzles that failing systems presented. Her competence was not a performance, it was an innate state of being, a silent, unwavering hum of expertise. She did not seek the limelight. In fact, she actively recoiled from it, finding solace and a peculiar kind of safety in the anonymity that her quiet efficiency afforded her. This particular shift, like so many others before it, had unfolded with the predictable rhythm of routine. Diagnostics flowed into minor calibrations, and then into the endless cycle of preventative maintenance, ensuring the fleet of industrial workhorses remained operational. But then, a subtle shift in the background hum began to assert itself. A low, rhythmic thrumming started to build, a vibration emanating from the very concrete floor of the depot, growing in intensity. It was a precursor, a subtle warning that the equilibrium was about to be shattered, and then The alarm, not the ear-splitting shriek of a fire drill, but a deep, resonant klaxon, an insistent, guttural warning that pulsed through the vast space, vibrating in one's very bones. The main hydraulic pressure manifold in Sector 7, a critical artery of the depot's operation, was failing rapidly. Panic, in an environment as tightly controlled as Redline, was not just chaotic, it was a luxury the system could ill afford. Most mechanics, caught in the sudden shift from routine to crisis, reacted with a practiced urgency, a flurry of shouted commands and hurried, almost desperate movements. But Nora moved differently. Her steps remained measured, her gaze unwavering as she navigated the sudden onset of chaos. She didn't need to ask questions, didn't need to consult a supervisor. The system's pained groan, the rapid climb of the pressure gauge on the auxiliary monitor she passed, the subtle, high-frequency whine beginning to emanate from the affected sector, all of it coalesced into a complete diagnostic picture in her mind. She knew the schematics of that main manifold as intimately as she knew the rhythm of her own breath. She understood its strengths, but more importantly, its inherent vulnerabilities, the stress points where accumulated wear and tear would inevitably manifest. The pressure was spiking now. Alarms on various consoles flashed red, indicating critical levels. A full system shutdown was no longer a distant possibility, it was an imminent threat. Or, far worse, a catastrophic rupture. An explosion of superheated fluid and shrapnel that could reduce an entire section of the depot to twisted, useless metal and gravely endanger any lives in its vicinity. Standard protocols, the meticulously designed automated safeties, were clearly failing, overwhelmed, or perhaps even overridden by the sheer relentless force of the malfunction. Other mechanics, their faces already streaked with sweat and grime, their expressions etched with a mixture of urgency and fear, fumbled with their tools, their voices strained as they barked commands into their comms, but the system remained stubbornly unresponsive. It was a runaway freight train gathering momentum, heading for an inevitable destructive collision. A sharp metallic crack echoed through the space, like a giant pipe straining to burst. Nora didn't hesitate. There was no internal debate, no moment of indecision. Her right hand, almost a reflex, reached for her utility belt, her fingers instinctively closing around the familiar, cool steel of her own wrench. It wasn't one of the depot's standard issue tools, not part of the common inventory. It was heavier, older, its balance unique, its handle worn smooth in places where her palm had repeatedly gripped it, rough in others where the metal had been scarred by time and hard use. It was a tool that carried history in its very weight. She moved with an almost preternatural grace, a fluid economy of motion, slipping effortlessly past her panicked colleagues, ignoring their startled, momentary glances. Her path was clear, direct. She knew exactly where to go. A small access panel near the base of the manifold, a manual bypass valve often overlooked, rarely used, a contingency for the most extreme of emergencies. She knelt, her movements economical, precise, her focus absolute. With a swift, powerful twist, she applied the wrench to the hidden bypass valve. The moment her strength turned the ancient mechanism, the air around her filled with a violent, deafening hiss. Superheated hydraulic fluid, under immense destructive pressure, began to bleed off, roaring like a caged beast suddenly set free. The pressure gauge, which had been stubbornly climbing, began to drop with shocking, almost miraculous speed. The entire system shuddered, groaned, as if in relief, then began its slow, deliberate process of stabilization. The klaxon, which had seemed to tear at the very fabric of the building, slowly wound down, its piercing urgency fading into a series of relieved, intermittent beeps. A collective, palpable sigh of relief swept through the depot. Heads turned, eyes searching through the dissipating steam and the receding chaos, seeking the source of the swift, decisive action. They saw Nora standing up, the old wrench still in her gloved hand, wisps of steam curling upward from its head, the residue of the extreme heat of the released fluid. The metal of the wrench was still searing hot, its surface shimmering. The grime and accumulated oil that had coated it for years were burning off in faint, acrid plumes, creating a small, almost ethereal cloud around the tool. And as the heat continued to dissipate, as the layers of accumulated dirt and rust vanished, something began to emerge from beneath, something that had been hidden, deliberately concealed for years. Etched deeply into the side of the wrench, revealed with stark clarity by the scorching heat, was a series of precise, almost clinical characters. These were not the common markings of a manufacturer, nor a generic serial number. This was something far more specific, far more deliberate. A code. Echo 9, 7841B. A beat of silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by the returning hum of the depot's regular operations. Dr. Mira Thorne, a visiting systems analyst, stood a few yards away, her short, silver-grey hair reflecting the depot lights. Her glasses, usually perched in a practical, unassuming manner, seemed to magnify the sudden, profound alarm in her eyes. She froze, her entire posture rigid, as if an invisible, powerful current had just passed through her. Her gaze, sharp and analytical, locked onto the inscription on the wrench. A flicker of recognition crossed her features, quickly followed by a widening of her eyes, an expression that bordered on dread. Her lips parted, as if to speak, but no sound escaped them. The air around her seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. Beside her, Cal Maddox, a junior mechanic barely out of his apprenticeship, leaned against a nearby console, his dirty blonde hair falling carelessly across his forehead. He was 25, exuded the casual arrogance of youth, and was always quick with a dismissive remark. He witnessed Mira's sudden dramatic reaction, saw the old wrench in Nora's hand, and snorted, a derisive laugh escaping him. "What's with the museum piece, Nora?" He jeered, his voice loud, carrying easily in the vast space, laced with a smug, almost condescending superiority. "Found that in a dumpster? Looks like some kid's bad graffiti." He was utterly oblivious, completely unaware of the profound meaning behind the etched lines or the silent, earth-shattering shock it had just triggered in Mira Thorne. He saw only an older woman, a simple mechanic, using an archaic tool. He saw someone beneath him, someone to be easily dismissed. Nora didn't dignify Cal with a glance, not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Her eyes, however, had followed Mira's, observing the analytical eye's sudden, involuntary reaction. She saw the immediate recognition, the subtle tremor that ran through the analyst, the sudden shift in her composed demeanor. It was a silent confirmation, an unspoken acknowledgement of a buried truth that only a select few would ever understand. Nora knew the code, of course. She had carried it physically on her person for years. But it wasn't meant to be seen. It was meant to remain erased, forgotten, an artifact of a program that officially no longer existed. With a movement as swift and practiced as her repair, Nora detached the wrench from the manifold. The faint curl of steam, the last vestiges of the superheated fluid, was gone. The metal of the wrench was cooling rapidly, returning to its familiar solid state. She slid the tool back into its designated slot on her utility belt. Then, with a firm, almost possessive gesture, she pulled her work coverall flap over it, securing it away from any further prying eyes. The code was hidden again. But the brief, blazing reveal, the sudden, intense heat that had stripped away its disguise, had been enough for Mira Thorne. And more than enough for Nora. That code, that single inscription, was never meant to see the light of day again, and now it had. The process had begun. The air in Red Line Repair Depot, usually thick with the cacophony of industry, now carried an invisible hum of tension, a frequency only certain individuals could perceive. Nora Elwyn, with her wrench secured and the etched code once more concealed, moved with the same quiet efficiency, yet her internal landscape had shifted. The brief, fiery revelation of Echo 9, 7841b, had irrevocably altered the predictable rhythm of her life. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the moment Mira Thorne's eyes had locked onto that code, a dormant alarm had sounded in the depths of a world Nora had painstakingly left behind. Later that shift, as the industrial symphony of the depot began its slow transition into the quieter hum of evening maintenance, Dr. Mira Thorne found Nora. Mira's approach was not abrupt but rather deliberate, her footsteps precise on the oil-stained concrete. She stopped a respectful distance away, her posture betraying a contained urgency. There was no casual preamble, no attempt at small talk. Mira's voice, when she spoke, was low, almost a murmur, yet it cut through the ambient noise with a startling clarity. "That wrench," Mira began, her gaze unwavering, direct. "The code on it. Echo 9, 7841b. There was a pause, heavy with unspoken history. Those tools were decommissioned years ago, officially, completely. Their possession is not merely irregular, Miss Elwyn. It's illegal, a federal violation of the highest order." Nora didn't flinch. Her expression remained impassive, betraying nothing. She simply continued to tighten a valve on the engine she was working on, her movements fluid and economical. She had anticipated this confrontation. Anticipation, after all, was a survival instinct deeply ingrained from her past. The words themselves, decommissioned, illegal, federal violation, were not new to her ears. They were echoes of a life she had systematically dismantled, piece by painful piece. A flashback, sharp and vivid, tore through Nora's carefully constructed composure, though no outward sign betrayed it. The world blurred for a fleeting moment, replaced by the stark, sterile white of a covert facility, a place that existed only in the deepest, most heavily classified corners of the government's black budget. The air, then, was clean, cold, devoid of the oil and grit of Red Line. Her hands, then, were not gloved in worn utility leather, but in pristine white synthetic material, manipulating interfaces far more complex than any hydraulic manifold. She was younger then, leaner perhaps, but with the same sharp dark eyes, though then they held a restless, almost burning intensity. Nora had been part of Echo 9, a covert override unit, an elite team of tactical engineers. Their mission had been to design, implement, and, if necessary, disable critical infrastructure systems across national and international networks. They were the ultimate failsafe, the ghost key, capable of unlocking or locking down anything. The wrench, Tool 7841b, was not just a tool. It was her assigned interface, her personal key to a vast, intricate digital and physical domain. It was a prototype designed for direct, analog access to systems that were meant to be unbreachable. The project had been classified beyond top secret, shrouded in layers of compartmentalization. Then, without warning, the program had been shut down, swiftly, decisively, a clean sweep designed to leave no trace. Personnel were reassigned, memories were managed, and all equipment, every single proprietary tool, every piece of code, was slated for complete destruction. But Nora, with her uncanny ability to foresee vulnerabilities, to exploit the cracks in any system, had vanished. Not a defection, not a betrayal, but an escape into obscurity, a deliberate, meticulously planned disappearance. And when she disappeared, she took with her the one tangible piece of her former life, her assigned tool, Tool 7841B. She had kept it, not out of sentimentality, but out of a deep-seated instinct for survival, a grim understanding that in a world of secrets, a forgotten key might one day be her only leverage. The code, Echo 9, 7841B, was not just an identifier, it was a ghost of her past, a mark of her unique function within that now dismantled world. The flashback receded, leaving Nora standing firmly in the present, the familiar hum of Redline a stark contrast to the silence of her memory. She slowly tightened the final bolt, then straightened, turning to face Mira. Her voice was as steady as her hands, utterly devoid of emotion. "It got the job done, didn't it?" Mira's jaw tightened. "That's not the point, Nora. The point is its existence. It shouldn't be here. No one from Echo 9 should be here, not like this." Her eyes flickered to the spot where Nora had secured the wrench. "Are you aware of the protocols for decommissioned assets? The legal ramifications?" "I am aware," Nora replied, her voice flat. "I'm also aware that the manifold would have blown if I hadn't used it." Their hushed, intense exchange, however, was not as private as they believed. Across the vast bay, Mr. Henderson, a depot supervisor, a man with a perpetually furrowed brow and an almost pathological adherence to protocol, had been making his rounds. He hadn't heard the exact words, but the intensity of Mira's posture, the hushed, urgent tone of their voices, and the sudden, uncharacteristic stillness of Nora had piqued his always suspicious nature. He had caught fragments, decommissioned, illegal, and then distinctively the name Echo 9. His eyes narrowed, focusing on Nora, then on Mira's agitated expression. He cleared his throat, a loud, deliberate sound that cut through the background noise. "Everything all right here, Dr. Thorne?" Henderson's voice was laced with an unctuous politeness that barely concealed his nosiness. He directed his gaze at Nora, a familiar look of condescension in his eyes. He'd always seen her as an anomaly, too quiet, too competent, a woman who didn't fit neatly into his carefully structured world. "Anything Miss Elwyn here has done to cause a fuss?" Mira quickly composed herself, her professional facade snapping back into place. "No, Mr. Henderson, nothing at all, just discussing past equipment specifications, a minor query." But Henderson wasn't convinced. His gaze remained fixed on Nora, then flickered to her utility belt, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes as he seemingly traced the outline of the hidden wrench. "I heard something about decommissioned tools?" His voice had taken on a subtly challenging edge. "We run a tight ship here, Miss Elwyn. All equipment, every last nut and bolt, must be accounted for and authorized. If you're holding on to anything that isn't standard issue, anything that could pose a liability..." He let the threat hang in the air, unfinished but heavy with implication. "You understand, of course. For the good of the depot, hand it over, and we can discuss this discreetly. Otherwise, I'll have to make a formal report." The words were a direct challenge. A low internal alarm bell, distinct from any mechanical klaxon, sounded within Nora. This wasn't just about a tool, it was about exposure. It was about her carefully constructed anonymity being shattered. Giving up the wrench meant giving up her last tether to a life of capability, her only personal means of defense against the shadows that might still linger. It meant surrendering her last piece of leverage. "There's nothing to discuss, Mr. Henderson," Nora stated, her voice flat, devoid of negotiation. "The tool is mine. It saved the manifold. It stays." Her refusal hung in the air, clear and resolute. Henderson's face tightened, a flush rising to his cheeks. He wasn't used to direct defiance, especially from Nora, who usually operated in such silent compliance. Mira, standing beside them, watched with a growing sense of alarm, a silent understanding passing between her and Nora. The implications of Nora's refusal were vast, reverberating far beyond the confines of Redline. The tension in the depot began to thicken, imperceptible to most, but acutely felt by Nora. Henderson, stewing in his frustrated authority, retreated, but his eyes, whenever they caught Nora's, were narrowed with quiet scrutiny. He began to subtly alter his rounds, appearing more frequently in her sector, observing her movements, her interactions. The threat he had issued, unspoken, was now very real. He would report her, not just to internal corporate security, but potentially to the higher authorities that Mira had alluded to. The incident began to ripple outward. The anonymous maintenance reports on the hydraulic malfunction were suddenly subjected to deeper scrutiny. The speed and unconventional nature of the fix, initially praised, now became a subject of whispered conjecture among upper management. Corporate eyes, always watchful for inefficiencies or liabilities, began to turn their gaze towards Redline, and specifically towards the mechanic who had averted a disaster with an unidentifiable, unregistered tool. But it wasn't just corporate eyes. Mira Thorne, with her background in decommissioned military projects, understood the true gravity of Echo 9. She knew the kind of entities that had once overseen such programs, and she knew their ruthless efficiency in maintaining secrecy. Her own presence at Redline, ostensibly for a systems audit, suddenly felt far more precarious. She found herself in an unenviable position, torn between her professional integrity and an ethical dilemma that bordered on national security. She too began to observe Nora, but with a different kind of scrutiny, one tinged with concern, perhaps even a flicker of professional respect. Nora felt the shift. It was subtle, like a change in air pressure before a storm. The casual interactions from colleagues became slightly strained. The glances from her supervisors lingered a fraction too long. The silence around her, once a sanctuary, now felt watchful. The weight of the world she had escaped, the classified shadows she had fled, seemed to press in on her once more. Her actions, born of necessity and competence, had inadvertently pulled back a curtain, revealing a dangerous truth. The wrench, her silent companion, now felt less like a tool and more like a beacon. A beacon that had just flickered to life, sending a signal out into the vast, intricate network of secrets that had defined her past. The code, Echo 9 7841B, was not just an identifier, it was a reactivation sequence, a hidden key that could unlock doors she had sealed shut. She had sought anonymity, pursued it with a single-minded determination, but the universe, it seemed, had other plans. The ghost key, now revealed, had sounded its first faint note, and somewhere, out in the vast interconnected world, ears that had long been deaf to its existence were beginning to listen. Nora Elwyn, the quiet, hyper-competent mechanic, was no longer just a shadow in the Redline repair depot. She was becoming a target. The quiet scrutiny had begun. The digital pulse of Redline repair depot, usually a steady, predictable rhythm, began to glitch. It wasn't an overt failure, nothing that would trip an immediate alarm or halt production. It was subtler, a pervasive tremor beneath the surface, like a fever breaking out in the vast, interconnected nervous system of the facility. The internal network logs, a river of data that flowed constantly through the depot's central servers, started to register anomalies. Small, almost imperceptible deviations at first, dismissed as transient errors or minor system fluctuations. But then they began to coalesce, to form a pattern. A repeating string of characters, an insistent whisper in the digital background. Operator 7841B interface detected. This wasn't a common error code. It wasn't even a recognized identifier within Redline's proprietary system. It was foreign, an intrusion, a phantom signal. The IT department, a small team usually preoccupied with password resets and printer jams, found themselves staring at screens full of data they couldn't reconcile. The string would appear, then vanish, only to re-emerge hours later, originating from various nodes within the depot, seemingly at random. It was as if a ghost was attempting to log in, leaving behind a digital breadcrumb trail that led nowhere, yet everywhere. Nora felt the pressure building, not from the system but from the unseen eyes. Henderson's scrutiny had intensified, a constant low-level hum of suspicion. He made a point of crossing her path, of pausing near her workstation, his gaze pointedly lingering on her utility belt. She felt the subtle shift in the depot's atmosphere, the new, unsettling quiet whenever she entered a common area. Whispers, she knew, followed her like shadows. Corporate inquiries had indeed begun, filtering down from the higher echelons, questions about the unconventional repair and the unregistered tool. The incident had opened a door, and now curious, wary eyes were peering through. Dr. Mira Thorne was less discreet. Her concern was palpable, her glances towards Nora less about suspicion and more about a shared, dangerous understanding. Mira cornered her in the auxiliary break room, away from the ever-present hum of machinery. Her voice was hushed, urgent. "The network logs, Nora. Are you seeing them? The operator 7841B string. It's escalating. It's tracing. Your wrench, it's not just a tool, is it? It's a transceiver, a beacon, and it's pinging. Someone is listening." Nora simply nodded. She had seen the logs, her own private monitoring software, a custom build she ran on an ancient off-grid laptop hidden in her small Spartan apartment, had already alerted her. The depot's network was merely a reflection of a larger, more intricate web. The wrench wasn't just pinging within Redline's localized network, it was reaching further, far further. That evening, after her shift, instead of heading home, Nora drove her battered pickup truck to a remote, abandoned industrial park on the outskirts of the city. The sky was a bruised purple, the last vestiges of twilight fading into the encroaching darkness. Rain, thin and cold, began to fall, slicking the cracked asphalt. She pulled her truck into the deeper shadows of a dilapidated warehouse, its windows long since shattered. The isolation was absolute, broken only by the distant hum of the city. Inside the truck, under the dim glow of the dashboard lights, Nora retrieved her wrench. Its familiar weight felt different now, no longer just a tool, but a living extension of a forgotten protocol. She connected the wrench to a private scanner, a device no larger than her palm, built from scavenged parts and powered by a microfusion cell. The scanner hummed to life, its small LED screen flickering, searching. It picked up a faint signal at first, then stronger, a pulsing electromagnetic signature. It was not coming from Redline. The scanner began to display coordinates, a precise GPS location triangulated from the signal. It was a decommissioned relay tower, 12 miles out, nestled deep within a forgotten tangle of power lines and overgrown wilderness, a ghost in the landscape, just like her, a place where signals had once flowed, then ceased, left to rust and decay. But now it was alive, or something connected to it was. She left the truck, pulling a waterproof tarp over the scanner and the wrench, protecting them from the intensifying rain. The drive to the relay tower was treacherous, the old service road a quagmire of mud and potholes. She arrived an hour later, the rain now a relentless drumming on the truck's roof. The tower loomed out of the darkness, a skeletal structure of rusted steel reaching defiantly into the stormy sky, its purpose long forgotten by the modern world. Leaving the truck a quarter-mile away, Nora proceeded on foot, equipped with a heavy-duty flashlight and a compact toolkit. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. She navigated the overgrown path, the beam of her flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. She reached the base of the tower, a concrete housing unit that served as the primary node, its metal door hanging precariously on a single rusted hinge. Inside, it was a cavern of forgotten technology, dusty consoles and defunct blinking lights, all coated in a fine layer of grime. But in the center of the main console, where the primary relay controls once stood, there was a single, old, analog port. It looked like a relic from a bygone era, incongruous with the advanced digital systems that now dominated the world. It was exactly what she had expected. Echo 9 systems had always had these analog backdoors designed for direct, untraceable access when all other digital paths were compromised. Nora unzipped her coverall, retrieved the wrench, its code now cold and hidden once more. Her fingers, steady and precise, traced the contours of the port. It was an exact fit. She pushed the wrench in, the resistance slight, a click echoing in the silent space as it seated firmly. The moment it connected, the single dusty screen on the console flickered. Then, with a sudden surge of power, it bloomed to life, a stark green text illuminating the darkness. The words burned into the space Echo 9 active node found. Reactivation sequence open. A cold dread seeped into Nora's bones. This wasn't just a ping, this was an invitation, an activation. The tool wasn't just sending a signal, it was responding. It was initiating a handshake with a system that should have been offline for decades. She hadn't just exposed the code, she had unwittingly begun to reawaken the dormant network. Her eyes scanned the screen, searching for more information, for an explanation. The words remained, stark and unchanging. Then a new line of text began to scroll rapidly across the bottom of the screen. Not system data, not protocol. This was a message. You exposed the code. Now we're both liabilities. The words materialized with chilling speed, sharp and accusatory. They were typed, not generated by a system, but by an operator. Someone was connected. Someone had been watching. Someone had been listening to the wrench's reawakened signal. And they knew. They knew about her. They knew about the code. The anonymous third party was no longer anonymous. They were here, now, digitally connected to this same forgotten node. They weren't just observing, they were communicating. Before Nora could react, before she could even process the full implication of the message, the screen flickered violently. The text dissolved into a chaotic scramble of pixels. Then, with a definitive snap sound, the screen went black. The power to the entire node was cut, the connection severed. The signal, which had finally screamed back to life, was abruptly silenced. The darkness in the relay tower was absolute, thicker than before, the only sound the persistent drumming of the rain against the metal structure. Nora stood there, wrench still firmly in the defunct port, the cold steel a sudden weight in her hand. The chill wasn't just from the damp air, it was a cold dread that permeated her. The reactivation sequence open had been a terrifying invitation. The message, "You exposed the code, now we're both liabilities," was a declaration of war. And the abrupt cut of the signal? That was a warning. A powerful, unseen entity had just made its presence known. She pulled the wrench from the port. The screen remained dark. The humming silence had returned. The anonymity she had fought so hard to preserve had been completely obliterated. She was no longer just Nora Elwyn, a quiet mechanic. She was Operator 7841B, a liability, identified and exposed. The simple act of using her old wrench had not just saved a manifold, it had inadvertently triggered a reawakening, pulled her back into a world she had desperately tried to escape, and drawn the attention of forces that operated in the deep, unlit corners of power. The signal they buried had woken up, and now whoever had buried it knew she was alive. The silence that followed the abrupt cut of the signal at the relay tower was more profound than any noise. It pressed in on Nora, a heavy shroud. The rain still drummed relentlessly on the corrugated metal roof of the abandoned station, but it sounded distant, a mere backdrop to the chaos unfolding in her mind. The message, stark and accusing, "You exposed the code," now were both liabilities, echoed in the cavernous space. The connection, the rapid cut-off, confirmed her deepest fears. The network, or at least a powerful faction tied to it, was not only dormant, it was alive, aware, and actively monitoring the re-emergence of Echo 9 signatures. She pulled the wrench from the dead port, its metallic surface now cool, inert. The green glow of the screen, the chilling activation message, had vanished, leaving only a blank, dusty rectangle. The tower, a relic of forgotten communication, had briefly flickered back to life, a conduit for a truth that should have remained buried. Now it was just a dark, empty shell once more. Nora retraced her steps through the mud and driving rain, the walk back to her truck a blur of grim determination. Her mind raced, sifting through possibilities, threats and countermeasures. She was no longer just dealing with Henderson's petty scrutiny or corporate inquiries. She had inadvertently nudged a sleeping giant, and it had blinked, acknowledging her presence. The question wasn't if they would come for her, but when and how. The next morning, Redline Repair Depot buzzed with an unusual undercurrent of urgency. News had spread like wildfire through the industry grapevine. A grounded freighter, the Odyssey Dawn, had arrived at the adjacent cargo bay. Not just grounded, but completely locked down. Its core system, a highly advanced proprietary drive matrix, had gone into an unbreachable security lockdown while still in transit. No crew could override it. No system architect could penetrate its defenses. It was a multi-million-dollar vessel, paralyzed, a colossal piece of advanced machinery rendered inert by an invisible digital cage. The freighter was a behemoth, its hull stretching for hundreds of feet, dwarfing the surrounding cranes and transport vehicles. Its main access hatch was sealed, unyielding. Engineers from the freighter's manufacturer, a global conglomerate with an iron grip on advanced transport technology, had flown in on a private jet. Their faces were grim, etched with frustration. They tried everything: direct system reboots, emergency access codes, even remote attempts to patch in through satellite links. All failed. The system remained a black box, impenetrable. Any attempt to force access would risk catastrophic damage to the sensitive drive, turning a repair job into a salvage operation. Nora watched from a distance, her gaze calculating. She observed the engineers, their frantic energy, their growing desperation. They were trying to break in through the front door, through the primary digital interfaces. But Echo 9 protocols, she remembered, were designed precisely for situations like this: deep systemic failures, unbreachable digital lockdowns where conventional methods were useless. Her wrench, Tool 7841B, was not just an override tool, it was a master key, designed to access the analog roots of even the most sophisticated systems, bypassing all digital firewalls and security protocols. It was a backdoor to the Foundation. Mira Thorne appeared beside her, her expression somber. "It's a complete shutdown, Nora. They've tried everything. It's an internal deadlock, A hard-coded anomaly. Something's protecting itself from external access. She paused, then her voice dropped to a near whisper. Do you think... Nora didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the freighter, on the almost imperceptible seams of its colossal structure. There's always a back door, Mira, she finally said, her voice quiet, almost to herself. Always a way to the core. She knew where it would be. Echo 9 engineers had designed many of these systems, subtly embedding their own fail-safe mechanisms, their analog bypasses, into the very architecture of critical infrastructure. They were always hidden, designed to be invisible to the common eye, obscured by maintenance panels or disguised as obsolete ports. They were physical anchors to a digital world. Later that afternoon, as the engineers continued to bang their heads against the digital wall, Nora approached the lead technician from the manufacturer. His face was a mask of exhaustion and frustration. "Sir," Nora said, her voice calm, clear, "may I suggest a different approach?" He looked at her, his expression weary, then dismissive. "Unless you have the root encryption keys, mechanic, I don't think there's much to suggest." His tone conveyed he had no patience for a common depot worker. "The core system's lockdown isn't a digital encryption issue," Nora countered, undeterred. "It's a foundational lock, an analog failsafe triggered by a systemic anomaly. You won't break it digitally, you need to access the buried port," he scoffed. "Buried port? There's no such thing. We designed this system from the ground up under the auxiliary coolant manifold, section Gamma 7, Nora stated, her words precise, unwavering. "There's a maintenance panel secured with 4 high-torque bolts. Behind it you'll find a single unmarked analog port. It looks like a diagnostic port from a pre-digital era." The lead technician stared at her, a flicker of something in his eyes, disbelief battling with a desperate curiosity. He exchanged a glance with his team. They had exhausted all other options. "Show me," he finally conceded, his voice grudging. Nora led them to the indicated section of the freighter. It was indeed an obscure panel, tucked away, almost purposefully disguised. Her hands, nimble and strong, worked quickly, removing the bolts. Behind the panel, true to her word, was the archaic-looking port, nestled amidst a tangle of modern fiber optics and microcircuitry. It was a stark anomaly, a piece of an earlier world hidden within the cutting edge. The engineers looked at it, confused. "What is it?" one asked. "It's not in any of our schematics." "It's an Echo 9 protocol access port," Nora stated, her voice devoid of triumph, merely stating a fact. She unclipped her wrench. "Tool 7U841B. The code remained hidden beneath her coverall. The lead technician's eyes widened slightly as she produced the unique tool. He recognized the type, if not the specific markings. Echo 9 was a whispered legend in certain circles, a ghost program whose engineers were rumored to have designed certain foundational elements of various industrial systems before their dissolution. But he had never seen an actual tool, nor believed they still existed. "You're going to try to plug that in?" he asked, incredulous. "It's not plugging in," Nora corrected him, her voice calm. "It's providing the system with a direct analog key. This tool was designed for this, to bypass all layers and access the core." With no further hesitation, Nora inserted the wrench into the buried analog port. It slid in with a satisfying click, a perfect fit. The moment it seated, a low, resonant thrum emanated from the freighter's core, not a malfunction, but a profound, almost sentient response. A network of internal lights, previously dark, flickered to life across the freighter's massive frame. On the primary diagnostic screens, which had been stubbornly black, lines of green text began to scroll, rapidly populating the displays. Access granted. Protocol Echo 9. The words shone brightly, clear and undeniable. The freighter's core system, which had resisted every digital assault, every conventional attempt at access, had yielded instantly to the physical. Analog key of tool 7841B. Engineers gasped, their faces a mixture of awe and bewilderment. The lockdown was broken. Complete access was restored. But Nora wasn't looking at the celebrating engineers. Her gaze was fixed on a small secondary monitor within the newly activated system. It wasn't displaying access logs for the freighter. It was displaying a different kind of data. System logs, her internal monitoring software, activated by the wrench's deep system integration, was now showing a beacon. A powerful outgoing signal transmitted the moment access granted had appeared. The wrench had not just unlocked the freighter, it had simultaneously triggered a beacon to a hidden server. An Echo 9 server, not the abandoned relay tower, but a live operational server, one that had been listening, waiting for its proprietary key. The tool still had clearance. More than clearance, it had activated a pre-programmed directive, and now she was traceable. Not just by a shadowy third party, but by a legitimate, active Echo 9 network. Her act of competence, of saving the Odyssey Dawn, had been a trap. A brilliant, insidious trap. The tool, her only leverage, had just turned into a homing beacon. Her cover, already compromised, was now irrevocably blown. The price of saving the freighter was her anonymity, and the price of being found, Nora knew, was often far higher. The game had just escalated dramatically. The successful unlocking of the Odyssey Dawn sent ripples of relief and quiet astonishment through Redline Repair Depot, and indeed through the entire corporate structure of the freighter's manufacturer. Nora Elwyn, the quiet mechanic, was suddenly elevated from an obscure anomaly to an improbable savior. The engineers, previously dismissive, now regarded her with a mixture of professional awe and thinly veiled suspicion. They couldn't explain how she knew about the buried port, or what archaic tool she possessed that bypassed their state-of-the-art security. Their official reports would be meticulously vague, omitting any mention of Echo 9% or 7841B, but the questions, the unspoken ones, hung heavy in the air. Nora, however, felt no triumph. The internal beacon, the one her wrench had activated the moment it connected to the freighter's core, hummed incessantly in her mind. It was a silent alarm, far more potent than any klaxon. The tool, her last vestige of operational freedom, had become a digital leash. The Echo 9 network, confirmed to be active and listening, now had a direct, traceable line to her. The fleeting anonymity she had clung to for so long was irrevocably shattered. Days turned into a week. The Odyssey Dawn was back on schedule, its core system humming with restored efficiency. The corporate commendations, distant and impersonal, trickled down to Redline. Nora ignored them. Her routine remained outwardly unchanged, but every movement was now calculated, every glance assessed. She felt the tightening net, the invisible threads drawing closer. Henderson, the depot supervisor, had been unusually quiet since the Odyssey Dawn incident, his previous petty scrutiny replaced by a wary distance, as if he sensed she was now operating on a plane beyond his comprehension. The subtle shifts in the depot's atmosphere were mirrored by a growing quiet on the digital front. The operator 7841B interface detected logs had ceased. Not vanished entirely, but gone dormant, as if the unknown party that had sent the warning at the relay tower was now observing from a deeper, more patient vantage point. The silence was more unnerving than the pings. It was the quiet before the storm. The storm arrived on a Tuesday morning. It didn't come with flashing lights or sirens. It arrived in a polished black sedan, so out of place amidst the grime and rust of Redline's industrial yard, it drew immediate, curious stares. From the rear seat emerged a man, tall and lean, with the unmistakable bearing of someone who had once commanded and still expected to be obeyed. His civilian wear, a meticulously tailored charcoal suit, only accentuated his sharp military demeanor. His silver hair was cut clean and precise, his face a study in controlled intensity. He moved with an almost predatory grace, his eyes cold and calculating, scanning the depot with an unnerving thoroughness. It was Colonel Harlan Druce, Rhett. Nora knew him instantly. The recognition was a cold fist clenching in her stomach, but her expression remained unreadable. Druce was her former handler from Echo 9, a man whose reputation for ruthless efficiency and unwavering loyalty to the program was legendary. He had been the architect of its classified shutdown, the orchestrator of its eradication. His sudden appearance, years after his official retirement, could only mean one thing. The re-emergence of Echo 9's signature had brought him out of the shadows. Druce didn't bother with the main office. He didn't ask for a tour or a meeting with management. He moved with purpose, his steps taking him directly towards the section where Nora was working on a heavy-duty transport vehicle. He walked past bewildered mechanics and startled supervisors, his gaze locked on Nora. He stopped a few feet away, his presence casting a long, imposing shadow. Nora slowly straightened up from her work, wiping her gloved hands on a rag, her movements deliberate. Her eyes met his, a silent acknowledgement of their shared dangerous history. There was no warmth, no surprise, only a grim understanding. Elwyn, Druce stated, his voice low, a controlled baritone that carried an implicit authority. It was a voice that commanded obedience, a voice that had delivered life-or-death orders in sterile control rooms. It's been a long time. Colonel, Nora replied, her voice flat, betraying no emotion. The formality was deliberate, a boundary drawn between them. Druce's lips curved into a thin, humorless smile. Still playing the grease monkey, I see. A surprisingly effective cover, though I must admit I didn't expect you to resurface quite like this. He glanced around the depot, his gaze lingering on the Odyssey Dawn, which was still visible in the adjacent bay. The Odyssey Dawn debacle. Quite the feat. Rumors have a way of traveling even to retired officers. Nora remained silent, waiting. She knew this wasn't a social call. We never found Tool 7841B, Elwyn, Druce continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more insidious, a snake coiling. It was the only piece of proprietary hardware unaccounted for after the Echo 9 dissolution. Every other interface, every single bit of code, every shred of data was purged, destroyed, or locked away in classified archives. Every single piece, save for one. Yours. It's been a persistent anomaly on our records, a loose end. His eyes sharpened, boring into her. You're holding a federal violation, Elwyn. Treason, some might call it. Unauthorized retention of classified government property. Nora met his gaze, unflinching. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, running scenarios, calculating risks. She had anticipated this confrontation, perhaps not Druce himself, but certainly someone from his world. She had spent years preparing for the day her past finally caught up to her.
Then why hasn't anyone stopped me?
She asked, her voice quiet, almost a whisper, yet it carried a cold, cutting edge. The question was a challenge, an accusation. If the tool was such a threat, if she was such a liability, why had they waited so long? Why now, after she had publicly used it? Druce's expression remained unperturbed. Patience, Elwyn, and strategy. We needed to confirm, to observe. Your little display on the Odyssey Dawn confirmed everything. The tool is still fully operational, and you, Elwyn, are still the protocol, the active interface. You are the asset. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur, though his eyes remained hard. "Let's be clear. This isn't a friendly visit. I'm here under a corporate front, a security consultation for the freighter's manufacturer, but my true objective is singular: retrieve the asset and suppress any exposure." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We have systems in place, Elwyn. Data trails that lead nowhere. We can make sure your little secret dies here. Quietly. No fuss, no scandal. Just hand over the tool and agree to a reintegration into a more controlled environment. Your skills, after all, are too valuable to be wasted on repairing cargo haulers." Nora felt a surge of cold fury, but her face remained a mask. "Reintegration?" she scoffed softly. "Into a cage? Under your thumb? You think I kept this tool, risked everything just to hand it back to the very people who tried to bury me?" Druce sighed, a theatrical display of patience. "Don't be foolish, Elwyn. There's no escaping this. Not anymore. The network is aware. Your signature, 7841B, has been flagged. You think your little stunt with the Odyssey Dawn went unnoticed by everyone else? There are others. Others who would dissect you to understand how that tool still works, how it connects. We're offering you a choice, a managed return or a very public, very painful dismantling. We control the narrative, Elwyn. Always have, always will." "You control nothing," Nora retorted, her voice gaining a steely edge. "Not anymore. I'm prepared. I've had years to prepare for this exact conversation." Druce's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise finally crossing his features. "Prepared? For what?" "For everything," Nora stated. "You thought you purged everything, Colonel? You were wrong. I copied the logs. Not just the physical logs, but the deepest, most secure digital records of Echo 9's true purpose, its failures, its unauthorized applications, the very things you worked so hard to bury. I made backups, multiple backups, encrypted, distributed." She continued, her voice gaining momentum, a quiet, chilling confidence. "And when the wrench reactivated on the Odyssey Dawn, when it connected to your hidden server, that wasn't just a beacon, Colonel. It was a trigger. An auto-disclosure protocol." Druce's composure finally cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "An auto-disclosure? What in God's name are you talking about?" "A dead man's switch, Colonel," Nora explained, her gaze unwavering. "If I go dark, if I disappear, if anything remotely resembling an accident happens to me, or if the tool is forcibly taken from me, those encrypted logs go public. Not to some obscure data dump, but directly to a civilian oversight panel. A specific independent body within the government, one that was always a thorn in your side. They've been waiting for a whistleblower like me. They just didn't know it. The access trail to the files, the decryption keys, they're already planted, set to disseminate globally, to major news outlets, to international human rights organizations, to rival intelligence agencies. The moment my pre-programmed failsafe is triggered, Echo 9's dirty laundry becomes front-page news across the globe. Everything. Every classified project, every questionable operation, every single violation of charter. All tied directly back to you, Colonel, and to the private defense contractor you're now affiliated with." Druce stared at her, his face a mask of dawning horror. This was not the compliant, easily manipulated asset he remembered. This was a tactical engineer, years in the making, who had turned his own methodologies against him. He had underestimated her, seen her merely as a wielder of a tool, not as the mastermind behind an intricate countermeasure. "You wouldn't," he finally hissed, his voice raw, stripped of its former calm. "Try me," Nora challenged, her voice cold steel. "You spent years trying to erase me, to erase Echo 9. You think I'd make it easy for you to clean up your mess now? This isn't just about my freedom, Colonel. It's about accountability. What you did, what Echo 9 did, it can't stay buried forever." Druce remained silent for a long moment, his eyes boring into hers, searching for any flicker of a bluff, any sign of weakness. He found none. He was cornered. His entire career, his carefully constructed retirement, his lucrative new position with a private contractor, all of it hung precariously on Nora's continued silence, and she had just ensured that her silence came with a very steep price. He finally broke the silence, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. "You're playing a dangerous game, Elwyn. You think this oversight panel will protect you? You think the world wants to hear what you have to say? There are forces far beyond your comprehension that will come down on you like a ton of bricks." "Let them come," Nora replied, her gaze unwavering. "I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being a ghost. And if my story brings down the corrupt infrastructure you built, then so be it." Druce took a deep, shaky breath, regaining a semblance of his composure, but the cold fury in his eyes remained. He had miscalculated. Severely. 24 hours, Elwyn, he stated, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "You have 24 hours to surrender that tool and those logs to my designated representatives. Do so, and we can still contain this. You'll walk away. A quiet life, no further interference. Refuse, and you face an industry-wide blacklisting. No job, no access. Every door you ever try to open will slam shut in your face. We will make you disappear, Elwyn. Not just from the records, but from existence. You won't be able to buy a cup of coffee without us knowing about it. You will be a non-person, a liability erased." Nora merely looked at him, her expression a blank slate. "My decision is already made, Colonel. You can try to blacklist me, but I'm not looking for another job in your world, and my existence is no longer up for negotiation." Druce held her gaze for another beat, then spun on his heel and walked away, his polished shoes crunching on the oil-stained concrete. His departure was as sudden and authoritative as his arrival, leaving behind a lingering chill in the air. Nora watched him go, then slowly turned back to the transport vehicle, her hands reaching for her tools. The wrench, still secured beneath her coverall, felt different now, no longer a burden, no longer just a key to a forgotten past. It was a declaration, a symbol of defiance. She had laid her cards on the table. The game was no longer about hiding, it was about facing the very forces that had sought to erase her. The 24-hour ultimatum was not a threat, it was a countdown, and Nora Elwyn, the quiet mechanic, was finally ready to make her stand. The officer who came back had found more than an asset. He had found an adversary. The 24 hours that Colonel Harlan Druce had given Nora Elwyn were not a period of deliberation for her, but rather a final, meticulously orchestrated countdown. The silence that had descended upon Red Line Repair Depot after Druce's departure was thick with unspoken tension, a palpable quiet that seemed to cling to Nora wherever she went. Colleagues glanced at her with a new, fearful respect. Supervisors avoided her gaze, and even Henderson, the perpetually officious supervisor, kept a wide berth, as if she now carried a dangerous, infectious aura. The whispers had stopped. There was nothing left to whisper about. Nora had made her stand clear and undeniable, and everyone sensed the tectonic plates shifting beneath their feet. Nora spent those final hours not in frantic preparation, but in quiet finality. Her actions were precise, economical, reflecting the years she had spent anticipating this very moment. She meticulously organized her small personal locker, removing only what was essential: her worn work boots, her spare coveralls, a few faded personal items, all left behind, shedding the last vestiges of her identity as a Red Line mechanic. This was not a departure, it was an emancipation. She walked out of Redline Repair Depot just as the first rays of dawn painted the sky a bruised purple, illuminating the sprawling industrial complex. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the familiar scent of oil and steel, now mingled with a subtle freedom. She wore a simple, dark jacket, practical trousers, and sturdy shoes. She carried no badge, no identification that tied her to the depot, to the corporate world, or to her former life. In her right hand she clutched a sleek black steel case, its surface unmarred, its contents a secret that weighed both heavily and liberatingly. In her left, a compact flash drive, small enough to vanish in her palm, yet containing a universe of buried truths. She didn't look back. There was nothing left for her there. Redline had served its purpose, a sanctuary, a place to disappear, a crucible where her past had finally collided with her present. Now she was moving forward, stepping out of the shadows and directly into the glare of exposure. Her destination was not some hidden bunker or a safe house, but a well-known, unassuming government building in the heart of the city. It housed various regulatory bodies, oversight committees, and a particular civilian oversight panel that had a reputation for dogged persistence and an almost pathological aversion to classified overreach. This panel, formed in the wake of several highly publicized government abuses, possessed the rare authority to investigate even the most sensitive national security operations, provided sufficient evidence was presented. They were the last bastion of true accountability, a thorn in the side of entities like Echo 9, and now Nora's chosen conduit. She arrived precisely at 8 a.m., the building still quiet, its halls slowly stirring to life. Her presence, a woman with quiet intensity carrying a steel case, drew curious but non-confrontational glances from the early arriving staff. She presented herself at the reception desk, asking for Ms. Evelyn Reed, the head of the Civilian Oversight Panel. Her appointment, made months ago through an encrypted, untraceable channel, was confirmed. Nora was led into a stark utilitarian conference room. The walls were bare, the table long and polished. Ms. Reed entered moments later, a woman in her late 50s, with shrewd, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet authority. She didn't offer a hand, merely gestured to a chair. She had been forewarned, vaguely, that a highly sensitive, potentially volatile report was coming, but Nora's appearance, so unassuming yet so resolute, was not what she had expected. "Ms. Elwyn," Reed began, her voice calm, measured. "You indicated you have information regarding a highly classified decommissioned program, and that this information is sensitive." Nora placed the steel case on the table, then the flash drive beside it. The soft click of the case latch seemed to echo in the quiet room. "More than sensitive, Ms. Reed. It's a truth that was meant to stay buried. A program called Echo 9 and a tool designated 7841B. She opened the steel case. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, lay the wrench. Its dull steel surface, marked by years of use, belied its true nature. She took it out, holding it briefly, its familiar weight a comfort. Then, with a practiced motion, she inserted it into a small, portable diagnostic port built into the case itself. A screen on the lid flickered to life, displaying a cascade of encrypted data, flashing codes, and a pulsing green light indicating an active, deep system connection. This was not a simple tool, it was an interface, an access key. "This," Nora stated, her voice clear, resolute, "is tool 7841B, my assigned interface from Echo 9. It was believed destroyed, purged from all records, as was the program itself, but neither truly was." She slid the flash drive across the table to Miss Reed. On this drive, you will find the full unredacted operational logs of Echo 9, every project, every protocol, every deviation classified beyond eyes only. Unauthorized applications, civilian infrastructure exploitation, shadow operations, all of it linked directly to the command structures, to the individuals responsible for its creation and, more importantly, its dismantling, including Colonel Harlan Druce. Ms. Reed picked up the flash drive, her expression unreadable. Her gaze flickered from Nora to the wrench, then back to Nora. You understand the gravity of what you are alleging, Ms. Elwyn? This is not a trivial matter. This is unprecedented. I understand fully, Nora affirmed, her eyes meeting Reed's without a hint of fear. I was there. I was part of it. I was one of the tactical engineers who built those protocols, who used this tool. When Echo 9 was shut down, it wasn't a true dismantling. It was a strategic reprioritization. The capabilities were too valuable to truly destroy. They were merely rebranded, rechanneled, and moved into the shadows, often through private defense contractors, effectively outside direct government oversight. Druce, my former handler, is now deeply embedded in that new structure. She pointed to the wrench. This tool, when activated, pings a hidden, active Echo 9 server. It's a direct link to the live operational network they thought was buried. My public use of this tool on the Odyssey Dawn was a test, a confirmation. It showed them the tool was alive. It also showed them I was alive, and that I retained full operational access to their decommissioned systems. I leveraged that access to trigger a fail-safe. If I am silenced, if these files do not reach their intended audience, the full unredacted contents of this drive, along with the precise access trail to the live Echo 9 network, are set to auto-disclose to every major media outlet and international watchdog group within the next 24 hours. The decryption keys are tied to a dead man's switch. My physical well-being, my continued freedom. Ms. Reed slowly leaned back in her chair, a deep contemplative frown on her face. This was not just a whistleblower, this was a strategic operation. Nora Elwyn had not just brought evidence, she had brought leverage, and a very potent form of protection. So you've become the protocol they forgot, Reed mused, her voice soft, almost to herself. The ultimate fail-safe against their own secrecy. Precisely, Nora confirmed. This isn't about revenge, Ms. Reed. It's about ensuring that a program with the potential for such immense power and such blatant disregard for oversight cannot continue to operate in the shadows. It's about accountability. She paused, then delivered her final statement, a quiet, powerful declaration. This is Echo 9 Field Report, Tool 7841B, status, reawakened, and the operator, myself, is here to provide full testimony, every detail, every truth that was meant to be erased. Ms. Reed looked at the wrench, then at the flash drive, then at Nora. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Respect, perhaps, or a grim determination. "All right, Miss Elwyn," she said, her voice firm, resolute. "We have a lot of work to do, and you, it seems, have a story to tell." Meanwhile, elsewhere, in a sterile, glass-walled office high above the city, Colonel Harlan Druce Rhett sat hunched over his desk, his face pale, a vein throbbing in his temple. The phone receiver was still clutched in his hand, though the line was dead. He had just received the call. Not from his contacts within the government, not from his private security network, but from a junior legal counsel from the Civilian Oversight Panel. The words had been clear, concise, utterly devoid of negotiation. "Colonel Harlan Druce Rhett," the voice had stated, formal and unyielding. "You are hereby served with a legal summons to appear before the Civilian Oversight Panel regarding allegations of unauthorized operations and a breach of classified protocols pertaining to the Echo 9 program. Your presence is required. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action. A summons, not a discreet warning, not a quiet negotiation, a full public legal summons. It was an unprecedented move, a direct shot across the bow. It meant Nora Elwyn had delivered. She had walked straight into the lion's den and not only survived, but had unleashed a force that even Druce, with all his connections and power, would struggle to contain. He slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the silent office. He pushed back from his desk, the polished chair scraping against the floor. His carefully constructed life, his post-retirement power, his entire legacy was crumbling around him. The private defense contractor he now worked for, a shadowy entity that benefited from the unchecked continuation of Echo 9's capabilities, would be furious. Their operations, their very existence, were now under threat of exposure. Druce paced the room, a caged animal. He had underestimated her. He had seen Nora Elwyn as a simple mechanic, a broken piece of a dismantled program. He had thought her competence was limited to physical repairs, her past easily controlled. He had dismissed her as a mere operator, a tool wielder. But he had been profoundly, catastrophically wrong. The wrench, Tool 7841B, was indeed powerful, but it was never about the tool. It was about the person wielding it. The real threat, the true protocol they had forgotten to account for, was Nora herself. Her memory, her precision, her unwavering moral compass, her tactical brilliance honed over years now turned against them. She wasn't just a former tactical engineer, she was a living, breathing, undecommissioned protocol. She remembered everything, and she had ensured that what she remembered, what she possessed, could not be silenced without bringing down the entire edifice of secrets. Nora Elwyn had not just been a witness to what was meant to be erased. She had become the living embodiment of that truth, the final undeniable proof that some secrets, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually, inevitably, find their way back to the light. The game was no longer in the shadows. It had moved into the public square, and Nora, the quiet mechanic they had dismissed, had just changed the rules forever. The hum of industry, the quiet clatter of wrenches, the unseen currents of power that flow beneath the surface of our world, these are the soundscapes of a story that cuts deep, a narrative not just about forgotten technology, but about the profound resilience of the human spirit. We've journeyed with Nora Elwyn, from the grime and overlooked routine of Redline Repair Depot to the stark, unforgiving battlefield of classified government secrets. We watched as a simple act of mechanical brilliance, using a tool that carried a code meant for oblivion, Echo 9 7841B, ripped open a past that refused to stay buried. Her story is a stark reminder that true power often lies not in the loudest voices or the grandest displays, but in the quiet, hyper-competent precision of individuals who understand the underlying mechanics of a system, whether it's an engine, a network, or the very architecture of truth itself. Nora was dismissed as a simple mechanic, her profound capabilities hidden beneath layers of grease and anonymity. She was underestimated by those who thought they held all the cards, by the very forces that had sought to erase her and the program she served. But her unwavering commitment to the truth, her meticulous preparation, and her courage to step out of the shadows revealed a purpose far greater than anyone could have imagined. The saga of Echo 9 and Tool 7841B is a testament to the fact that some secrets simply refuse to die. They linger, they resurface, and sometimes they demand to be heard. Nora's journey was not one of seeking fame or recognition, but of seeking accountability. She chose to wield her forgotten knowledge, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a scalpel to dissect the hidden layers of corruption and unchecked power. She transformed herself from an asset to be retrieved into a witness to be reckoned with, turning the very protocols designed to control her into her shield and her sword. In a world increasingly dominated by digital landscapes and complex, often opaque, systems of control, Nora Elwyn stands as a powerful symbol. She reminds us that understanding the analog roots, the physical connections, and the human element within these systems can be the ultimate form of leverage. Her ability to see beyond the surface, to identify the buried ports and the forgotten backdoors, allowed her to navigate a crisis that baffled even the brightest minds. And ultimately it allowed her to expose a truth that many powerful entities desperately wanted to keep hidden. The Colonel Druce of the world, those who operate in the shadows, believing they can manipulate narratives and control destinies, often make a critical error. They underestimate the quiet ones. They underestimate the individuals who, by their very nature, absorb, analyze, and retain information with a precision that becomes their ultimate unforeseen strength. Nora was not just an operator, she was the protocol. Her mind, her memories, her tactical brilliance, these were the true undecommissioned assets. She was the fail-safe they forgot to build a kill switch for. Her decision to bring the truth to a civilian oversight panel was a courageous act of faith in the very principles of transparency and accountability that powerful, covert programs seek to circumvent. It was a declaration that even the most deeply buried secrets can be brought to light, and that those who orchestrate such secrets can and will be held accountable. The legal summons delivered to Colonel Druce was not merely a piece of paper. It was a thunderclap, signaling the dawn of a new era, where the forgotten protocols, once reawakened, demand justice. This story, like so many others we explore here on Veteran Biker, delves into the hidden mechanics of our world, the unseen forces that shape our reality. We strive to bring you narratives that challenge perceptions, illuminate the unlit corners, and celebrate the unsung heroes who navigate complex landscapes. Nora Elwyn's battle was not just for her own freedom, but for the principle that even the most powerful entities must ultimately answer for their actions. It's a story about the quiet power of defiance, the enduring strength of integrity, and the enduring truth that knowledge, once activated, cannot be easily silenced. We hope Nora's journey has resonated with you, sparked questions, and perhaps even inspired you to look a little closer at the world around you. What were your thoughts on Nora's ultimate decision? Did Druce get what he deserved? Share your insights and reactions in the comments section below. Your feedback fuels our engines and guides our future explorations. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into a world of hidden codes and unexpected heroes, please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Veteran Biker for more compelling stories that push the boundaries of what you think you know. And as always, remember to check out the other videos appearing on your screen now for more thrilling narratives from the edge of the known. Until next time, ride safe and keep searching for the truth.